The sun is fascinating. It is neat to live in a day where we get to know things that have just simply never been known before. I mean, anything you're talking about right now regarding the sun's surface and the period of sunspots and the minimums and the whole nine yards. This has only been known for literally a relatively few number of decades.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still stuff, obviously, that we have not thought through. In fact, this is one thing that scares me, and I bet you observe this all the time. Science now is such a diverse field as far as you can go so in depth into genetics or into the various biological realms or into earth physics and everything else that almost anybody has a PhD has a PhD in an extremely narrow field. And that almost functions to make sure that they can't have a broad education that connects them with everything, with the other fields of human study. And the result can be very scary, can be frightening. It really can be.
Yeah, it really is. That's a very significant issue today. And I first of all, I feel blessed to live in the time that I live in where we have all this information. It's wonderful. And it's easily accessible now because of the internet and things like that. It's wonderful. I love it. But one of the problems is when you specialize, because so much is known, you can only be an expert in a very narrow field of study. And that's something, by the way, I recommend to Christians who maybe you don't have a lot of education in science. And don't be intimidated by somebody who has a PhD in a particular field. I'm sure he knows that very nuanced field very well, but that doesn't make him an expert on everything else in science. It really doesn't. Mm-hmm. And so don't be intimidated. That being said, I have a lot of friends in different fields of science from the different places I've worked, from working at Answers in Genesis and so on. So I know PhDs in biology and PhDs in geology and so on, and I try to maintain at least a base level of knowledge in these other fields, and I think that's important for us to have an accurate view of the universe. It's good to know different experts in different fields, and the ones that I give the highest weight to are Christians, and so I know they have a proper worldview. But you'd be surprised how many experts in their field, they know nothing about other fields.
Yep. And
they'll talk about evolution. Maybe they don't know anything about biology, but they're convinced that Darwinian evolution is true. And well, how do you know that? Well, they don't know. They don't know it. They're assuming that it's been proved by all the other scientists.
Yeah.
It's a real issue these days. And I've talked with enough secularists that I know that's true. They're trusting in the consensus, not in data.
Well, and it's not just in astrophysics or anything else. In the field of theology, you're taught something in seminary, and again, there's a lot of topics that you can get into. And so, for example, the issue of the canon of Scripture, the vast majority of New Testament scholars have not spent a great deal of time studying issues such as canonization. But people will always say, well, 95% of New Testament scholars believe such and so. And it's like, if you're in the field, you go, yeah, but 98% of them have never read more than 2 articles on the subject. So what does any of that mean? And all this consensus stuff really breaks down as soon as you just start pushing on it at all. Yeah. And I think that's the case in pretty much every field. It's the same type of thing. Yeah. So hey,
I remember sitting in an undergraduate class in geology, and they were discussing. I can't remember if I've told you this or not, but they were discussing the age of the Earth and everything. And of course, they don't determine the age of the Earth from Earth rocks; they determine it from meteorites. And you think, well, why is that? Well, because of the underlying assumption that the solar system formed at a certain time. And well, how do we know that's accurate? And well, and the answer that my geology professor gave was, well, the astronomers they've demonstrated that the solar system is 4.5 billion years old. Fast forward a few years later, I'm in grad school, and we're talking about the radiometric dating and the dating of the sun, and how do we know that the sun's really that old? And they say, well, the geologists have demonstrated the Earth's that old, and so on. Each was relying on the other for their evidence, and I thought that's really telling because they're obviously not communicating.
No,
it's an issue.
No, it is. It's a major